All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. It is Friday, May 27th of 2022. Thank you for tuning into the stream here today. If it's your first time watching or listening to this show, my name's Jordan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and Office Hours is an open Q&A style show where I answer questions from the SaberSim community about DFS, about SaberSim, whatever you guys want to talk about here. If you have questions you would like me to answer on this show, you can email us, support@sabersim.com. You can ask your questions live in the YouTube chat. And of course, you can post your questions in the Office Hours channel in Slack. I try to answer the questions that come in the Office Hours channel in Slack first. So if you're not already in there, there's a link to join in the description of every past show. So definitely get joined up into Slack. Should be an interesting stream here for us today. We've got quite a few questions in our queue already, mostly about overall baseball DFS process. I see a couple questions, a few questions about the baseball sims themselves, some questions about, I guess, to summarize exposure, stack exposure in particular, some stack ownership questions, question about baseball slate scheduling, interesting one there, variance, my overall baseball process. So all kinds of stuff to get into here on today's stream. If you have questions, though, fire away. Get them into YouTube chat or the Office Hours channel now so that we can get to everything before the end of the show today. Let's go ahead and dive right in here. Get the app pulled up. And I think today we'll probably just go ahead and go chronological order here because we got a lot to get to. So we'll start with a question from Adam here. And a good one I don't think I've actually even ever answered before. So a good question here. He said, to what extent is pitch hit risk accounted for in the sim/stack upside? If I say something like, I don't want to play the Giants because they get pinch hit too often, am I actually double counting how the PA projections get produced by SaberSim? How, if at all, is that type of game result decision factored into the model? And then you noticed something where the fifth hitter had less plate appearances than the sixth hitter for the Angels last night. And the answer to this question, and I had to actually go talk to the models team about this, is pinch hit risk is taken into account in our model. So we have a historical sense of how often certain players get pinch hit for, how often certain teams pinch hit, and we do calculate pinch hit risk. So that does come through. Probably the clearest way to see how that will come through and how that relates for different hitters and different teams and things like that would be the plate appearances here. So we do have pinch hits in the simulations themselves. And that is why you can, on occasion, see something where a batter hitting lower in the order might have a higher average plate appearances if that particular player does get pinch hit for a lot. So I would say if you were going in and, adding more onto that, it probably would be at least in some form of double counting. If you were saying, I don't want to play a lot of Giants because the Giants get pinch hit for a lot, that is already included in the Sims, right? We are calculating that in. So I would probably say that's a double counting thing there. I don't know if I would spend a lot of time on that. But good question, and one that I had to go and do a little bit of my own research with the team on. So good one there. Okay, and then let's get into a question here, a handful of questions from Ed here. So this first one is about stack exposure in different slate sizes, or actually it looks like contest sizes. So he said, I typically play, looks like a variety of 20 maxes. And the question is there a general rule of how many teams to concentrate on for stacks? Would you base it on some percentage of the slate? Would there be more teams targeted for larger slates? Would you suggest limiting stacks to X team no matter how big the slate size, but knowing that 20 max is your population for a particular contest? And then he said, the reason I ask is because presently I think I'm targeting too many stacks. I think this has too many effects. One is to limit my upside when a stack really goes off, but also increases my chances of missing stacks or not winning at all. I want to take a long view of this. So what do you recommend for the long run? Sorry for the long question. Wanted to give you some context. Okay, so first of all, for those that are already in Slack, interesting conversation that has kind of spawned off of this as a thread in the Slack channel. So I'd recommend going and reading this. I'll kind of give you my take on this. We answered a very similar question to this yesterday. And the answer that I'm going to give is similar to that. And it's, I don't really like heuristics like this that say something like even normalized to slate size, use this many teams, stack up this many teams in 20 lineups for a 12 to 15 game slate or something like that. I just think it ignores a ton of additional slate context. I always get mixed up contest and context. I'm saying slate context. It misses a lot of slate context, right? And there's going to be slates where, the example I gave yesterday is if there is, one particular well-projected team, a team that is projected to hit far better than the rest of the other teams on the slate, especially combined with relatively spread out pitching, right? A lot of equally good pitching opportunities. A lot of times, I think the optimal strategy there is to be more concentrated on your hitters and and less concentrated on your pitchers, right? And you might have in 20 lineups, you might only be stacking up 6 or 8 teams or something like that total, right? And probably have a lot of exposure to your highest exposed stacks. There's other slates where you're going to be, really significantly spread out at the hitting stacks. Maybe, yesterday we had a situation where Nola and Ohtani were by far, and I guess Montes too. We had this kind of tight range of pitchers where there was an elite group of 3 pitchers and everybody else was kind of a weaker pitching option. I ended up being really wide open with my stacks that night because I was so concentrated at pitcher. I had such a concentrated pool of pitchers that I naturally found diversity in my lineups with the hitting stacks. I do think, if you want a general, I think rather than searching for a heuristic, rather than saying I want a general rule of thumb, the sim precision slider is going to be the biggest factor that determines how much exposure you're getting to the best plays on the slate or to your portfolio's favorite plays on the slate. And this slider has been, optimized and normalized for different contest types, right? Different contest sizes and different slate sizes. So when you run this, you are going to get, I would say, an exposure, a stack portfolio that is appropriate for the average player, right? So if you're asking, how many stacks should I kind of be getting exposure to on a slate like this for 20 lineups? I think running a test build and seeing will give you a slate contextualized answer to that question. That's probably going to be a lot more accurate and a lot more useful to you than anything I could say of just pulling a number out and saying, yeah, it's this. And from there, again, this is an average. So different people are going to have a different way they want to add to this, right? I've mentioned a few times on stream here, I play pretty diversified. Especially in baseball, I like to be pretty spread out on my exposures. So, just looking at this, right? We are getting quite a bit of exposure to Cleveland here tonight. And we have a total of, once this loads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? So 11 stacks. That's kind of like at a baseline where we're at tonight. And then I guess the other thing to note too is that even a heuristic gives no real information on how spread out you are amongst those stacks, right? There's a difference between having 11 teams stacked up where your highest exposure is 85% versus 20%, 30%, something like that, for example. But that's kind of at least one way to look at this particular slate. So for me, I probably would not want 85% exposure to my favorite hitters in 20 lineups. I would probably bring this down to like 40%. I would probably be a little bit closer to here. Computers, all right, there we go. So I would probably be doing something like this, right? Managing my risk, capping my exposure to some of these hitters. And I might end up, just because I want to be more diversified, I might end up being more here, right? Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 teams are stacked up. So 4 additional teams on a 13-game slate. One is not right. One is not wrong. It's a matter of risk tolerance. And how much exposure do you want to a particular team? The more exposure you're getting to a team, the more upside you're going to have, the more upside potential you're going to have when you're right, but the more risk you are assuming when you are wrong. And it seems like that's kind of where the discussion has gone in Slack is about that risk versus upside calculation. I think the last thing that's worth noting here is there is a matter of the actual ownership as well, right? Like there's a conversation going on in Slack here about how it sounds like some folks stacked up the Dodgers last night and then just had kind of a middling performance ROI wise, right? Well, the Dodgers were the chalkiest stack on the slate last night, or one of the chalkiest stacks on the slate. You need to roster a bigger proportion of your lineups. You need those guys in more of your lineups to get a bigger win when you are right, to get that leverage over the field. That is kind of what leverage is. So that would be another consideration as well. The more contrarian your stance is on the slate, the less exposure you're probably going to need to those contrarian plays, and then the more you can afford to spread out. The more chalky you are going to play, the more with the field that you are going to play, the more lineup equity you're going to have to, the more portfolio equity you're going to have to commit to those chalky stacks, and the less you're going to be able to spread out. So if you told me, Jordan, I'm ready for the slate, I've done my research, my three favorite stacks tonight are the Angels, Red Sox, and Dodgers, you might only be able to get to like 6-7 different team stacks, because you're going to have to get 30, 40, 50% of your lineups filled up with those teams in 20 lineups to get some leverage over the field, because those players on those teams are owned 10, 15, 20%, right? So I think that's another way you can handle this too. Rather than saying, I want 10 teams stacked, 12 teams stacked, 5 teams stacked, however many, 20 teams stacked, whatever. Instead, focus on what those teams are and ask yourself, what does it take relative to their ownership for me to get over the field on them? On a 13-game slate like tonight, it's actually pretty easy to get over the field on any stacks, on any teams. But on a 5 or a 6-game slate, you have to be a little bit more intentional. And that's almost an interesting, and before I start rambling, and we got a lot to talk about here today, but I think that's almost an interesting way to actually think about ownership in a way that's not really the way that most people think about it, right? Is that, rather than thinking, suboptimal or optimal ownership, thinking about what proportion of my bankroll allocation for the slate tonight do I have to invest to get a positive leverage situation on this team, right? Even just completely removing yourself from thinking about the ranges of outcomes or probabilities of a player, right? To get positive leverage on the A's tonight, I have to commit 5% of my total allocation. To get positive leverage on the Red Sox tonight, I have to get 25% of my total allocation, right? I have to commit 25% of my total allocation, right? There's a 500% difference there in what you have to invest to be positively leveraged on that team. Is there a 500% difference in the probabilities of those teams having success, right? I'm doing kind of just some quick mental math here. I don't even know if this is the proper way to calculate that, but I do think that's an interesting way to kind of think about ownership there as well. Instead of thinking about, ranges of outcomes of success of a team, think about the portfolio equity you have to commit to get even with the field or over the field on these particular stacks. So anyway, Ed, on this particular question, I think that the summary here for me is I don't even have a rule of thumb or a heuristic that I would give you here. I would say if you want a slate adjusted way of a slate contextualized way of doing this, I would run a test build on default settings for the contest you're playing and see how many stacks it gives you. From there, there's going to be a lot of personal risk tolerance of how you want to approach it from there. And if you truly are saying, I understand all that, but I just want your opinion, I like to play kind of diversified. I find myself often diversifying further from what the default settings give me. So if you run a test build and you're getting 8 to 12 stacks on a team on a slate like tonight, I'll probably end up with 12 to 16 just because of the way that I naturally diversify my lineups. So good question there. Let's go ahead and jump into the next one. Okay, and then this is an interesting one here as well. Is there a way to find out what DK slates will be for the next 3 to 5 days? I know they're officially published on the site. Is there somewhere else to find a good guess on the slates, times, etc.? I don't think so. I do sometimes when I have to do this, I'll go to ESPN, and I don't know why I go to ESPN in particular. I just have gotten in the habit of doing that. It was probably a way better way to do this, but I'll check their schedule, and you can kind of piece it together, also combined with a sense of intuition about how certain days slates typically go. So, I mean, it's a holiday weekend, so a little bit interesting here, but so Saturday, you typically almost always get a split slate. We might get 3 here. So this is kind of where you need to have a little intuition, but we always get 2. We get an early and a main on Saturday. So we'll probably get a main starting at 5:15 my time. So that's 7:15. And then we'll probably either get an early that begins with the super early game, or I think maybe even more likely we'll have an early that's these 3 games, and then a bigger afternoon that is like these 6. So you can kind of just group games together and piece it together there. Sunday, almost always we get the 11:30-ish, 1:30 Eastern main slate, which will be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games. There'll be a smaller afternoon slate and then a bigger showdown that night. That's pretty much always true on Sundays. For Memorial Day, I think we'll probably get a kind of a Saturday type of schedule here. So again, I think you'll probably get a small early, an afternoon, and then a main. So you can kind of just, I don't know. I think if you've played for a while, played multiple days of the week and kind of understand how they end up going, you can kind of piece it together. Tuesday nights, and for baseball, Tuesday nights and Friday nights, you typically get big main slates, like 10 plus games main slates. Wednesday and Thursdays, we typically, I would say, on average, get the split slates. So you get an early slate, smaller early, smaller main. And then Mondays, normally when there's not a holiday, I would say you normally get your smallest main slate of the week. So a lot of teams are off. You'll have like 4 to 7 games on a Monday main slate or something like that. But you can kind of piece it together. There's no way, as far as I know, to go of like look this up and figure out what DraftKings is going to run. Sometimes they'll post their slates a little bit early, but I don't know of any way to, go dig this information up beyond just kind of giving your best guess at it. So, yeah, but hopefully that kind of helps a little bit. That's how I do it when I have the same thing going on. Busy weekend coming up. You got to know when you're going to be around to set some lineups. So, okay, cool. And then one other question here. Said, there's a follow-up to a question a few days ago. What's the best source to find estimated chalky MLB stacks? I go to 3 to 4 sites, SaberSim, Labs, a couple others to make a table, then do standard deviation for each team's estimate and an average of the group. I then use the order for the teams with the most implied runs having the chalkiest stacks. What other methods do you know of, and what are the pluses and minuses of each? Honestly, Ed, I kind of feel like I should go to you for team stack ownership rather than you coming to me. That sounds like a pretty good process. That sounds pretty similar to what I've described here on stream before. If you're pulling like SaberSim info down, going to Labs, and then coming up with this method, I would bet that you're doing at least a pretty decent job of projecting team stack ownership. Honestly, for me, most of the time when I want team stack ownership, I'll look at Labs and I'll do this Vegas dashboard, and it's good enough for me most of the time to just sort by the highest implied live total at lock and get an idea of kind of at least the rough order of what the chalkiest teams are going to be. Honestly, on a 13-game slate, I think there's really only going to be like a chalky stack or 2 chalky stacks that are above everybody else. And then from there, I think you'll find everybody's kind of just in the middle apart. And then you'll have a handful of teams that have like microscopic ownership, but you can kind of almost see it in the totals. I mean, tonight I can already tell you it's going to be Red Sox chalk, Dodgers are going to be chalky, and then it's going to be like every other team from there. If you want to actually come up with the values of stack ownership, if you want to actually try to come up with a number, the best I've found, the best way I've found to calculate stack ownership is to just download the total player ownerships on the slate and then average the 5 chalkiest players in the order for a particular team. So just take, if you want to actually see like what percentage of lineups are going to have a Dodgers stack, right? And we're actually a little low on them right now. Who do we think is going to be chalky? Boston in particular, maybe LA. On a 13-game slate, it's going to be so spread out. But like honestly, that's been like one of the best methods I've found is to just take the average of the highest 5 projected players in the lineup and just say that's the team stack ownership. And that actually I think works pretty well. The thing you got to remember with projecting stack ownership in general and why it can be difficult is that projecting ownership on a player level is, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier because everybody has to submit a full lineup. So your third base ownership has to add up to 100%, and it gives you something solid to rest on. Projecting team stack ownership is hard because you don't really know what percentage of lineups are going to stack and what percentage of different constructions are going to be used. So you have to make some assumptions somewhere. You have to assume, I'm just going to assume to make it easier that everybody's running a 5 stack, right? But that's not actually what's going to happen. And it gets kind of hard of, what is a stack? Is it any two players from the same team? Like we typically call it that? Is it only a 4 or a 5 stack or more? So I mean, again, Ed, I think what you're doing here sounds like probably a pretty robust solution anyway. I imagine that your numbers you are getting are pretty good anyway. It's more sophisticated than what I've done in the past when I've tried to calculate these numbers for myself. For me, some combination of just studying the closing line, the closing implied lines, and pulling batting ownership and averaging them together has worked pretty well for me to calculate stack ownership. So, and Ed also said, have a great Memorial Day weekend. You as well. I appreciate it. Okay, we have a few other questions in Office Hours in the Office Hours channel to get through here. So I see some questions coming in YouTube chat. We'll get to them shortly. Be patient with me here. We got a busy Friday stream here, which is always fun. So Eagle said, just a general question. I keep getting into the top 100 in 10-cent contests. Sooner or later, it will break my way. Will it break my way, or should I tweak my process? It depends a little bit on, the size of the contest. Top 100 is going to mean a lot of different things. Top 100 in a 10-cent contest, I assume that's the dime time. So, if they're the smaller dime times, that's like top 10%. And if they're the bigger dime times, that's top 3% roughly, which I think is you're doing pretty well, right? I think that's off to a good start. I would say, if you're playing those dime times, keep playing, keep learning, keep getting more familiar with the roster construction concepts that it takes to be successful playing baseball DFS. I think those can be really good contests to continue to learn, especially learning how to build a larger portfolio of lineups. I think you could also experiment with the quarter jukebox where there's a little bit of a bigger payoff at the end. It might even be better maybe to explore that quarter jukebox where you have a little bit of a better opportunity to actually like kind of have a bigger hit. If you're playing dime times, you're playing $2 to win 10 or 30, which can be, a fine contest to add in to increase your overall like portfolio especially just to get some lower stakes action in. But I might explore just playing that quarter jukebox instead, where you have an opportunity to realize a little bit more all at once, right? Quarter jukebox is $5 to max out. And it's normally anywhere from $200 to $500 when you take it down, depending on the size of the slate. So a little bit more opportunity there to have a big payday. I think there's more lineups in that contest. So you'll get a little bit more of an opportunity to, kind of see, if you're finishing frequently in the top 100 in that kind of contest, for example, you're probably doing something right, and variance will probably swing your way shortly. So hard to know, without other data here. My general rule of thumb is if you're taking a certain outcome, you just want to make sure that you're outpacing your average expectation, right? So a lot of times I look at this and I say, I want to, my average expectation of top 1% lineups is 1%. Right? If I was playing 100 mans over and over and over again, I would expect to win that on average 1 out of every 100 times. Well, if I'm actually doing it every 2 out of 100 times, right? Well, that means I'm doing something right because I'm winning more than my fair share. And that's the way I would look at this too, is if you kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive here, getting into the top 100 is great. What percentile is that actually in the contest, and how often is it happening? I think is a better way to look at it. So, but cool. Okay. So Raymond had a couple questions for me here, and said, I would like to see Jordan set up parameters for a random MLB slate before creating lineups. I've been doing it and watching videos, but it seems something has changed a little from some of the videos. Yeah, so I have a lot of content up on YouTube now. My process has changed like slightly here and there. There are, maybe little steps that I used to value a little bit more. Now I value a little bit less. One that immediately comes to mind, especially if you watch some of the last year's content, is I used to spend probably a fair bit more time doing research and making sure I agreed with the ownership projections. And with the work that we put in over the offseason this year, I think our ownership projections are pretty rock solid now. I don't really feel the need to do as much tweaks there. In terms of, setting parameters, my final build that I end up taking with me into a contest really generally resembles the default settings. I don't add a lot of my particular value by making tweaks here, which is why almost every single day on this stream, I recommend also that people don't spend too much time worrying about settings and instead worry about, what are you doing to projections? What are you doing on step one? Or I guess not step one anymore. The projections tab or on the post build process on the build screen. I'd be happy to give you kind of a brief walkthrough of quickly what my process, I would say what my average process looks like on a particular slate. And the first step here, almost always, is to run a test build, right? I like to run a build with default settings for the contest that I'm building for. So we'll use a 20 max for tonight. I think I'm entered into the mini max tonight, but I'll do a test build here, and I'll kind of just get an idea of what left to its own devices, what is SaberSim going to do, right? Seems like we're pretty heavily on Cleveland stacks at the moment. On Bieber, Manea, Verlander, right? The aces up top. And then getting some of these value pitchers here. I like to look, what are we doing with the chalkiest stacks? So it looks like pretty aggressive fades of Boston, the Angels, the Dodgers. That's probably similar to how I would end up taking this particular slate. I would probably play. I would probably be willing to fade those teams pretty aggressively. Then I'll do a kind of a lap through a couple other resources. So one I always like to see is this Vegas dashboard. I like to see if SaberSim's perception of the chalk is in line with what I think people are actually going to do. And in this case, it is Red Sox and Dodgers. I might make a note that maybe we think that the Angels are going to be a little bit chalkier than they are. They don't seem to be favored too much by Vegas here. We think at least Ohtani and Trout are going to be pretty popular. A couple of these other bats, they always are. So maybe they will just be chalky, but I do think maybe there's an opportunity there. I'll also go and check weather. So I'll use Kevin Roth's free dashboard on Roto Grinders. And I haven't done this yet today, so curious, but I'll get an idea of where weather games are. So actually, quite a few weather games on the slate here tonight. It looks like particularly maybe some concerns in Washington, which is always a special note whenever there's weather in Washington here, because they postpone games pretty easy. So, but kind of good to research there. And then I'll run my research build, right? So the research build kind of kickstarts my actual own research process. And what I'm trying to do here is I am running a 1,500 slate simulation of the slate. I'm saying go of our thousands of different game sims of each game on the slate, pull one game sim out for each game on the slate 1,500 times and show me what the optimal was for that slate simulation. And all I'm trying to do here is get a sense of where is some chalk inefficient, where's maybe some opportunities to get some lower owned plays. What do the sims say is the right way to play this particular slate? So we'll see what this looks like. And this will take a second to build because it's 1,500 lineups. And how much I end up using this particular build really kind of depends a lot on how much time I have. Sometimes, if I'm a little more pressed for time, I'll look and see if I can just find a couple opportunities to get a little bit of an edge. Maybe a couple players or a couple stacks I think are over or under owned. I'll add a little bit of value in my final build that way. If I have a lot of time, sometimes I'll pull this file down to my computer and I will calculate leverage on every single player on the slate. But no need to take this and make this more complicated than it needs to be. I think you can, kind of be you think you can make this part of the process for you as complicated or as simple as you want. So I'm looking for kind of inefficiencies here, right? And one that immediately jumps out is, Manea is a great play here tonight, but if we get to 50% ownership, he's the best projected pitcher on the slate, highest percent chance to be optimal, but this kind of looks like an opportunity of maybe I might just take the other side. If I was just kind of taking notes here, I would probably start thinking, maybe I only want about 25% Manea, especially with some of these other pitchers on the slate, right? If we're getting, guys that have pretty similar percent chances of showing up in that optimal here, I don't know if I need to eat 50% ownership. So I might be willing to go a little bit of a different direction there. Sometimes I'll see if there's anybody with a chance of being optimal and a positive leverage. So Whitlock might be a guy I'm a little bit interested in here. Let's take a look at the batters here. So again, Boston, Dodgers, Angels, even if you believe those ownership projections, look a little over-owned here. Probably just getting away from all of those teams here. I might be particularly interested in Toronto. I think Toronto actually kind of stands out as being a uniquely kind of interesting team here. Low owned with a pretty high chance of being in that optimal lineup. If I end up taking a heavy stance on the Manaea fade, I might also get to a little bit of Pittsburgh just in directly leverage against that here. But again, if I only had a couple minutes for the purposes of doing a quick demo here on stream, maybe that's enough. So now I'll kind of run in here and do my final build. And this is what I call my working build. This is what I'll actually end up using for the particular slate. And one thing I want to emphasize here too is that the research build process part of this is kind of what makes this uniquely my own. I'm not saying everybody needs to do this. Your research process might be going and looking, watching videos or listening to like live before lock shows or whatever else. Maybe you're doing some research into some I don't know, anything. Whatever floats your boat there. To me, I like to kind of take focus on the sims and do an analysis basically of the raw sim data. That's what I found works for me for research. But that part of the process is kind of, I would say, the part that makes it uniquely your own. And this has just resonated with me over time of a way to do this. Let's see. So now let's finish this up here. So let's take another look at pitchers. So I do think I maybe want to be on the underside of Manaea here. So I'm going to cap his exposure at 25%, which I think is about his optimal rate here. I found, so Whitlock was a guy that looked kind of interesting to me as a guy that might be a little under-owned. I don't need a ton of exposure, but I might want to get to 15% here. Cool. And then I'll go over to batters. And what I'm going to do, 13 game slate, since I decided there's a couple opportunities to fade here, I'm going to just make sure that I am off completely on Dodgers, Red Sox. And I know I'm not getting any exposure to these stacks, but I want to just X them out completely here so that they don't pop in with exposure here after I'm all done. So I am, okay. So I am out on those guys. And then I might go in here and obviously, again, one thing I want to do here is manage my risk a little bit here. I don't feel the need to get 90%, 85, 80% exposure to any of these players, any of these hitters. So I will probably just do kind of a global 40% max to my hitters here. I just don't need that much exposure to any of these guys. Cool. And then last thing I'll do is probably make sure, so I'm getting some good Toronto exposure. So that feels pretty good there. I might just for fun see if I can get, is there any, okay, so I'm not even getting any Pittsburgh stacks at all. So I was going to say, just for fun, as a way to directly leverage against that Manaea chalk, maybe I would try to get like 5% or 10% Pittsburgh stacks. But the fact that they're not showing up in this list means they're not even showing up in my 500 lineups period. So I'll probably leave it there. So what did I get out of this, right? So I built a build, basically I built a build on default settings, right? But I made some targeted stances against the chalk in different directions here based on my research build. I managed my risk on batters because I don't like having too much exposure to any one hitter. I guess the last thing I would do here, especially for a 5-game or 13-game slate, is I probably would do a little bit pruning of my stacking here. I want to play on a huge slate like this. I like to play really correlated lineups. So I typically probably only want one uncorrelated player max, and I probably want like the biggest stacks possible, just because it's hard. You don't really need the optimal. You don't even need to get close to the optimal to take a contest down on a 13-game slate. So I want to give myself as few places that I need to be right. So, big stack, smaller stack, 2 pitchers. Let's go. Let's lock it in. So that would kind of look like a build for me, especially for something where I had 10 or 15 minutes to kind of get it done. So the part that I would spend a little bit more time on if I had more time would be the research part, the running the research build and seeing, are there any other inefficiencies here? Is there any situation where I just straight up disagree with the percent chance of being optimal or the ownership projection, that kind of thing? So. Okay. Okay, so it seems like there's some follow-ups here. So 8game is Raymond here. He said, what about player minimums here? So I will. Okay, so yeah, he said what when you set player minimums and what can cause problems for a player not to appear. So if you get a message, so let's use Pittsburgh for example. So let's say I decided that I wanted to play a ton of Pittsburgh, and I came over here and went to the best projected Pittsburgh hitter, which is Brian Reynolds, and said I want 50%. Right? Let's see. Okay, so what do we get here? We get this message that says, let's move some things around here. We need to expand the lineup pool in order to match your exposures, continue building. So what is happening there is that it's saying, okay, we built you 500 lineups and you are selecting for 20, and we can't find 20 that match everything you're trying to do here, right? We can't find 20 that matches your min and max exposures you've set to every player. And if I think there's a couple different ways that this can happen. If you're really taking a different stance than what the projections say, right? Like clearly the Sims love Manaea. And really don't want to play any Pittsburgh bats. So adding in 50% Brian Reynolds, the builder's like, no, we can't do that. Another way this will come up is if you've added min and max exposures to a lot of different players, eventually you just run out of lineups to sort through in that pool. So when this happens, you can go in here and click yes. And a lot of times it will just kind of work out. You'll end up getting exposure to it will rebuild lineups and specifically try to rebuild them in a way to fit the exposures that you requested. And a lot of times this will resolve the issue, right? Especially if you have like one player that you're just trying to get exposure to, like I do in the case of Brian Reynolds here. A lot of times you can just get there. But we'll see here in a second if it actually works. Okay, so it didn't. And I expect that in a moment here, the message will pop back up. If you end up in a loop and you're struggling to get the exposures that you want here, what I think the best thing to do is to go back to the projections tab and instead make some adjustments here, right? So, figure out what are you actually trying to accomplish? Is there a player that you want more exposure to? Is there a stack you want more exposure to? Is there a player that you're getting too much of? And make the adjustments here. So in this particular case, a good example might be I'm trying to fade Manaea and I want some pirate stacks. So maybe I'll come in here and give them a boost. I normally start with like a half run. And let this update. And this is going to have the impact of reducing Manaea's projection and increasing the projection of all of the Pirates batters. And now we can run another build and try again, basically. Another thing I would recommend if you're running into a lot of issues here with this as well is increase that pool size. So build yourself 1,500 lineups instead of just 500, and you'll have more lineups to work with there. So yeah, that's kind of a summary of I guess kind of what my process looks like most nights here, and what I would do if you're running into issues there. I know it looks like there was a question here specifically about trying to force a player to 1% of your lineups and not being able to get any exposure to a particular player. In that particular case, I would double check and make sure, if you can't even get 1% exposure to a player, I think you can try the steps I've just described here. I would also just make sure that you don't have like a stacking rule or a player group rule or something that is limiting exposure to that particular player, or you just don't even have them in your pool at all. Typically, when you can't even get 1% exposure to a player, I think you'll find that there's a parameter that's causing issues there. So. Okay. I'm going to jump over and hit the YouTube chat questions here and get to these, and then we'll jump back into Slack. At least there were a couple in here that I saw. Let's see. Looks like a few comments, so we'll just hit these here. 8game earlier it said 40 seems aggressive to me. Yeah, that's personal risk tolerance. I'm fine having 40% in 20 lineups. So referring to those batting exposures, a lot of times for 150, that's closer to like 25%, 30%. It's max exposure to any one player. For 20 lineups, I'm fine with that. But yeah, I have no problem playing in a more spread out way. 12 packs at the winner last night in the $15 stacked Boston and Dodgers at a 3% owned pitcher. Yeah, I think that's kind of the way you have to do it if you're going to play the chalkier stacks. It was a chalk ham night last night for sure. You could tell just 315 points took down the flagship on FanDuel. That's definitely a chalk ham kind of night. So 8Game said plan DFS around everything else. Live and love and play whenever it's convenient. I think that's the healthy mindset. Every single time I particularly try to schedule DFS in when I'm doing other stuff that weekend, I always feel stupid when I'm like having to like check like for late swap stuff at an event. So I kind of take the same stance there. But Dat Boy Steven said, thanks for the advice yesterday. My single entry lineup finished 24 out of 3K people. Wow. It's a nice finish. That's a good finishing percentile there. Congrats. Glenn said, I bet on golf today solely based on ownership projections. They were really, really wrong. Yeah. So I will say two things on golf. So first of all, our golf ownership projections themselves heavily use our own model here in the projection model. So it's something we want to improve in the future. But at the moment, if we are particularly high on a particular golfer, we are going to assume the field is too. Golf is also a very narrative-driven game when it comes to ownership. There will be narratives about golfers that are particularly of good recent form, that have particular good course history, that have good course fits. Maybe they're playing at their home course, right? There is no DFS sub-community that likes narratives more than the golf DFS community. And we use a algorithmic model to assess ownership that is mostly based on optimal percentages and how often players are showing up in optimal lineups in our sims. So we will miss a lot of that. I think in particular, one of the best spots to add value on the golf sims themselves is by studying the ownership projections and making sure that you agree with that direction. I think they're directionally pretty good, but they will miss a lot of those narratives and those kind of steamed players that show up there. So Tryhard Sweat said, hi, do they take into account batter history versus the team they are playing and or pitcher they are facing? Yeah, so BVP, batter versus pitcher, is not a very predictive metric. The main reason why is that sample sizes are just extremely low, right? You don't really have a statistically significant sample in most BVP matchups. Even in a situation where the batter is facing a pitcher that both of which have been in the league for a long time, and maybe you do have, even 100 at bats or something like that in between them. There's so much that there's so much that changes outside of that, the skill of that batter and pitcher, the park that they're playing in, the weather, right? All of these different situations that you end up with not a very effective sample anyway. So I know that there are definitely baseball DFS players out there that are BVP truthers. We are not. So we do not take into account BVP in our modeling at all. And I mean, frankly, if you think there's something there, and maybe in a particular matchup that you think there's something there, I think that's an opportunity that you can make adjustments. I wouldn't. I myself don't really believe that there's a lot of predictive value in BVP just because of how noisy the data is and how small the samples are. So Eric said, why is SaberSim giving a lot of love to Cleveland stacks today? Okay, so I kind of think my gut is that it's because the stacks themselves are pretty well correlated to Bieber, who we are pretty high on. That's my initial impression. I could be wrong there. We made some adjustments to the way that pitcher and batter correlation is handled in the Sims, but it still has a factor. So I also think we are probably just higher. Oh no, we're not higher than Vegas. Is there leverage against the? I will say it's always really hard for me to answer this question and be like, this is the answer why. I mean, it looks like not. Excuse me. Not a very good pitcher on the other side of this. So, I mean, maybe they're a good play. I would suspect that the reason why you're getting very high exposure to Guardian stacks at the moment might have something to do with that correlation. Yeah, I think that's probably part of it. So I think one way to maybe factor that in or maybe get around that a little bit would be to consider capping your exposure to Guardian stacks, first of all. Secondly would be to set some stacking rules to calculate some of that correlation for yourself and maybe bring down the correlation slider a bit. Might be a way to kind of get a little bit more of a balanced stance on the slate. Because it does seem like those are being pretty heavily incorporated there. So Eric said, is there a way to script on Saber? No. Any automation like that is not allowed. Say if I want 30% Dodgers and 20% of this or that, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I will say, well, any automated like pulling on from our data is not allowed, like scripting past projections or things like that. But this question maybe seems different. Say if I want 30% Dodgers and 20% of this stack tonight, how do I do this? Same with pitchers. Can I get, yeah. So, okay. So if you want to, I mean, this maybe I misunderstood. So you can set these min and max exposures to particular teams on SaberSim very easily. In fact, that's like basically how SaberSim was designed. So you would go in here and come over to your team stacks. And so you want 30% Dodgers. So you can set a minimum exposure to the Dodgers of 30%. And we will scroll through we will go through your pool of 500 lineups, sorting and finding your best 20 where all of your min and max exposures are set. So same thing if you want to come over here and say pitchers, right? I also want, I don't know. Who are we not getting any of? I want 30% Brandon Woodruff, right? You can come over here, 30%, and same thing there. So we'll go through that bigger pool and find exposure here. So I mean, I may have misunderstood. I think maybe these are just two different questions. And maybe it doesn't mean script. I don't know. I think I'm just misunderstood there. But yeah, very easy to edit your exposures in the build screen to get your lineups dialed in exactly the way you want. So 8 Game said, so in my case, bumping Rogers projections corrects the issues. Thanks. Perfect. Yeah, that'll typically work. So Mark said, Jordan's the best. Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys. 8 Game said, anyone on the fence about SaberSim should sign up for the trial. I've been using other optimizers for years, and the week trial made me cancel the others I've been using. I'd love to hear that. It really does help you focus your strategy, and I don't have to set up my PC. My tablet is perfect. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That's great. And I'm glad you were able to tune into some of the different office hours episodes we've had this week. So I could help introduce you here a little bit. So Chuck said Devin Smeltzer had a big game last night for his price. Yeah, I saw that. He was doing pretty good. You didn't need him, I don't really think, at the way it all worked out. Just because, I mean, you got the Nola smash, and Montes had a good game too, and they weren't even that expensive. But yeah, Smeltzer did. Smeltzer was looking good. Okay, let's go ahead and jump. We have a handful of other questions that were in the Office Hours channel in Slack. So we'll hit these here, and then starting to get to be about that time. So let's hit these real quick. So, hey, Jordan, you've talked a little bit. This is from Matt. You've talked a little bit about using your research builds, taking them Excel to do some projection updates. Was wondering, are you editing batter point projection based on leverage, optimal minus own percent? If so, what amount of leverage would trigger you to increase/decrease projection? I would imagine you view 8+ batter leverage different than 0.5. And finally, how much are you willing to increase/decrease a projected amount? Honestly, I have experimented with this in a lot of different ways, and I don't think there is one way that is objectively best. Like, this is kind of really getting into the weeds here. I think the baseline way I have done this is just adjusted the player's projection by the leverage itself. That's kind of like my baseline, right? So like if I think Manea is 21, well, that's not the good example. I would use the research build value, right? If he's 25% overowned, I will decrease his projection by 25%. But that really, like, that doesn't take into account, that's my baseline. That's kind of like my starting point. That doesn't really take into account the different strategies you would want to take for different sized contests and how different sports play together, right? So I've noticed, like, if you do that for MMA, you will get insanely strong fades. You will take like these really aggressive fades on the slate if you build 150 lineups, you'll have 100% exposure to like 3 different fighters. You'll be fading all the chalky fighters. If you do that for a big baseball slate, sometimes that actually always has like very little effect. So this is one of those questions where I think this is getting to the point where I can say I think this is a good idea, because I do a little bit of this myself. I won't be able to give you a one-size-fits-all solution that tells you exactly how to do this. I would experiment with moving that needle around yourself and seeing what impact that has on the projections, and then uploading those to SaberSim and seeing what impact that has on building lineups. Because like basically what you're doing if you start going this direction is you're doing the ownership fade process, part of the process for yourself, right? That's kind of part of the reason I started to go down this path, is because I wanted to I wanted to be able to have a little bit more of a hands-on approach to ownership. I wanted to like decide my own fades. So I started doing it this way. If you start going down this rabbit hole, you're leaving the safety of the back-tested slider, and you kind of have to make your decisions on what an appropriate amount of fading and leverage is for your slate. And that's going to determine how big you want that research build multiplier to be against the projections. But at a baseline, that's kind of what I've been doing, where I basically reduce or increase the projection by the ownership inefficiency itself. So let me know if that helps. I know that's not like a perfect answer. Again, I've mentioned this a bunch on stream here, where the deeper we go down a particular process, the further I get down into somebody's process of saying, well, you think this is a good idea, bad idea, the less I'm going to be able to say unequivocally yes or no. And you get a lot of middle ground there. So, okay. Robert had asked a question here. And said, I watched your video on building your bankroll, MLB bankroll, and looking to use this process. However, I built a $10,000 bankroll over the past year, playing primarily high stakes, $33 and $100 in small field, 10 to 25, 250 entries on FanDuel. Am I getting lucky? My thought was to just play plus EV lineups regardless of the stakes and field size. I mean, honestly, if you have found success in a particular contest type, I wouldn't like change your whole strategy just because because of my video, right? So I mean that video is focused on the one up there is focused on maximizing expected value, right? Maximizing your at all costs, maximizing your theoretical ROI, finding the softest opponents to play against against all else. I mean, if you are successful in these smaller stakes or higher stakes, smaller field contests and have built up your own role, I would stick with what is working. If you want to experiment into some larger fields and maybe a little bit more multi-entry, I think it can be a good way to spread out some variance and eventually get you a little bit more action down as your bankroll continues to grow. But my goal with that video, I think, is primarily to give people that are unsure of what contests to play, period, a starting point, and maybe players that are playing DFS and are having a hard time making money and being profitable, that are playing contests that are sharper than they need to be, an option to go find some softer contests. I still believe small field, high stake contests can be pretty sharp and be difficult to beat. But if you have proven that you can beat them, and over a year, I feel like that's a pretty good sample size, then play those, right? So, and with all that said, coming very soon here, we have been doing a lot of analysis on contest selection this past couple weeks. And I believe probably next week, I will be interviewing Eric, one of our data scientists here, on basically his findings of this big kind of research project we've done about contest selection overall. So really excited about that. I think it will change slightly some of our contest selection positioning, not a full departure from what we've recommended in the past, but we have some new fresh data to kind of back up some of our opinions on what the best contests to play are. And I'd recommend checking that out. Again, that'll probably be going up next week. We'll be doing that. So really looking forward to that. But yeah, I mean, short answer here, and this is kind of true, across the board, of if you have something that's working for you, right? If you have a process that's working for you, if you have a set of contests that's working for you, a sport that's working for you, I wouldn't reinvent the wheel because of anything I say on stream here. I would, maybe look for ways to incorporate things that you like or resonate with you into your process. But I would not, man, I would be so sad to hear that somebody that, was crushing small field, high stakes contests, pivoted to playing large field GPPs just because that was, and then lost money just because I said to, right? Like do what works for you if you know it is working for you. So Josh said, whoever Sean's on is, he always wins. He's been having a good season. He's been running crazy hot. So, okay, a few more questions here. Let's see here, or a few more notes. Chuck said, who was the 3% on pitcher they were talking about then that won the big FanDuel GPP? I'm pretty sure it was Smeltzer. I may be wrong. Maybe it was. I think I saw a screenshot of the rally winner last night, and it was Montes and a Dodgers and Red Sox stack. But maybe like the bigger one. I know that was like the $9. So maybe the bigger one had Smeltzer. I could totally be wrong. I might be wrong there. 8 Game said, for showdown slates, I like as many lineups as possible. For example, there are 2 large NBA tournaments. I max entered both 150. What's the best way to use my top 300 lineups randomly into the 2? So you'll want to use, so I don't have 2 contests entered here for tonight. So I'll have to just kind of show you. But what you will want to use is, so you'll have a 300 lineup set, right? Save that. So we have our lineups. And then when you fill your entries, so you'll have 2 here, right? You'll have number 1 and then number 2. Just make sure both are selected, and then make sure you have a 300 lineup set up here and use either unique rank or unique random. You probably want unique random. I think I would do unique random. That's going to be literally just distribute my 300 lineups randomly amongst these 2 150 maxes. Unique rank will put your top 150 in the contest that's listed higher, and then the next 150 in the contest that's listed lower. So it kind of depends on what you want to do, right? If you want, it really depends on what you want to do, how randomly distributed you want those to be. But either unique fill method will make sure that you get a unique lineup into each entry. 8 Game said, I figured I would be happy with either 100K or 10K, and 300 lineups give me a better chance at winning one or the other. Yeah, I mean, they do. They absolutely do. So I think that makes sense. All right. Cool. I don't see any other questions coming in here today. That was another fun stream. You guys are keeping me on my toes this week here. Some really good questions, some tough questions in here. Diving into, setting your variety of exposures, your exposure to different players on a slate, my research build process, your research build processes, assessing stack ownership, all kinds of different stuff. So that was another fun stream. This is a good one. We have a holiday coming up here on Monday, Memorial Day. We will not be doing office hours on Memorial Day. So I will be back on Tuesday next week, 2 p.m. Eastern. So I will go ahead and leave it there. HC said, you better rest up, Jordan, so we can hit you with more next week. I will be rested and ready on Tuesday afternoon. I will be ready to rock. So get your toughest questions ready for me. The best of the best here after the long weekend. So looking forward to it. But 8 Game said, how can we tip the host? 8 Game, you being here is all the tip I need. Participating in the chat and hanging out with me here for the hour. So anyway, enjoy the long weekend, everybody. Good luck tonight. Have fun on the 13-game slate. I always like these Friday slates. I think the huge slates are kind of just an extra fun level. I don't know. I'm kind of a fan of the big slate for baseball here. So anyway, I'll see you guys all on Tuesday. Good luck tonight. Good luck. Enjoy your weekend, and see you then. Take care.